might be interesting to see how the perfect robotaxi is blending in a rather chaotic driving system.
That is Nina Leffers, a McKinsey alum and partner in a boutique consulting firm called Stahl Automotive Consulting. Nina's firm works with auto companies around the world on developing the vision and key specifications for their future models. And in this episode, she walks us through some examples of how her team works with clients to design those key aspects of cars that we'll see on the road 5 years from now. You can learn more about her firm's work at sac-group.eu. SAC stands for Stahl Automotive Consulting. I hope you'll consider signing up for the weekly Unleashed email. I'll send you the transcript of each episode, book recommendations, and consulting tips. And to sign up, visit umbrex.com and click on the Unleashed tab. Hello, Nina. It is great to have you on the show.
Hi, Will. It's my pleasure.
So, Nina, I'm so happy to have you on the show because you work on a topic that I really know nothing about. So I'm really fascinated to learn about it. You and a partner run a firm and you work on, like, one of the main things you do is sort of concept car design, the early phases of designing a new car. Tell me about how that works and about your practice.
Well, I mean, first of all, we have to understand, typically our clients, they have an idea in mind. For example, they say, why is there no luxury electric vehicle that is targeting this and that customer group in this and that country? So that is typically the starting point. They say there is a need for a new car, right? And obviously, in many cases, our clients, they have a pretty good understanding on what a good car is and what the market needs. But we would typically, when we define new cars, we would typically start with the brand value of the company, if there is one already. I mean, obviously, some of our clients, they develop their cars from scratch. And then we would go on and understand how attractive is the target group. Really, how big is the target group? What are the target group's needs? That would be another typical source in the early stage market research. There is a couple of readily available off-the-shelf research, such as the Sigma milieus for China or Xenos for Germany. But in many cases, we go out and do our own market research. Another source then would be benchmarking. We would look at, are there any available cars? And if so, in what dimensions would we need to beat them? I don't know, for example, maybe we found out that the most important aspect for the relevant target group is, is the screen or the cockpit. Then we would go and look, how do comparable screens, how do comparable cockpits in other cars look like, and what do we have to do in order to be better than competitors? And then, of course, once the whole, once we have an early idea of the car, we would go out and probe that with a couple of experts we have a rather deep network, a broad network of experts from the automotive industry, and then we would start the discussion with them to see whether the car is really reasonable.
And so what are the different kind of aspects that you're looking at? I suppose there's kind of regulatory aspects, there's like the shape or the size, or are you trying to figure out what does the price point have to be?
Mhm.
Tell me a little bit about when you say like the different dimensions. What are some of those dimensions that you're looking at?
Well, this is a pretty structured approach. So you can imagine a car as consisting of a lot of different modules, and then we would go through all of these modules. I don't know. Let's start with the interior, the engine. So the car can be really broken down in many different tiny aspects, and then we would go through all of them and basically develop our view on every single aspect that makes a car, right?
And this is amazing to me. I guess I totally would have thought that a car maker would have, teams of, I don't know, a hundred people doing this sort of product, early design.
Well, they do, but not all of that. Well, they do have that, right? Of course, there's probably thousands of people working at BMW doing exactly that, but not all. But right now, and this is the fascinating thing about our market, right now there's simply new players popping up, and there's rather lean ways to produce a car without having a multi-billion-dollar automotive company in the background. So there's companies that the big engineering providers. So you could call them and say, "Hey, this is Will. I'd like to build a car. I have a couple of ideas. Can you do that for me?" So I'd say it became, in the last couple of years, it became so much easier to design and build a car and bring that to the market. And some of those new market entrants do not have that big teams that work on defining the car. What we call that the brand and product attribute profile. So and then we run through all of the different attributes, and we break them further down into sub attributes and then tiny little items, and we go through all of those items and define what makes a good car.
That's amazing. Could you give us some examples of the brand and product attribute profile? Like, what would some of the high level categories be that you're looking at, and then give some examples as you break it down level by level?
Well, as I said, of course, it depends on the customer group you're targeting, but one of the main attributes could be comfort. And then you would break down comfort down to different sub attributes. One would be interior. And then you'd say, how should the controls tactile feel? That means, how easy is it to switch control? Is the steering wheel covered with leather? Things like that. So I think you get an understanding by now. This is pretty much in detail.
How do you go about doing the market research? Is it traditional surveys or focus groups or something else? How do you go about understanding those customer segments that you're targeting?
As I said, for many markets, there's what we call milieus. I hope this is the right English translation. And so, for example, a pretty straightforward one would be upper class, non-traditional, avant-garde. You would probably call that target group. And then we already have a pretty good understanding of the needs and desires of that specific target group. But then we would go out and if we say this is the relevant target group, then we would definitely have to talk to a couple of people in that target group.
You mentioned how things are changing, and it's become possible to do this process instead of with a team of 100 at BMW, to do it in a much more lean way. Could you give an example of something that's changed, where something that used to take a big team, it can now be done by you and your partner?
Well, of course, we still work with the client organization if it's there. right? I wouldn't say that now the automotive industry is the leanest industry on earth. So we don't do that all by ourselves. There's still people at the client organization that are doing exactly that thing, and maybe we just show them how to do it and they would still do it themselves. Nevertheless, maybe there's I don't know, maybe there's companies right now that are a bit bolder, and they say, why not just try it, and why not just build a car and see whether it works.
Just build it and see if they will come. That's pretty cool. Give us a little bit of the background of you and your partner in your firm, and how did you kind of get the expertise to start doing this kind of work?
Martin, who's founded the company, Martin has founded the company in 2013, and well, he by now has about, 20 years of experience in the automotive industry. So he has been working with BMW for 10 years. And after that, he joined McKinsey, where he also focused on automotive projects. And well, I've joined the company a bit later, and Martin and myself, we met at McKinsey, where we were both part of the automotive practice. So this is where the background comes from.
And now you've been independent. Tell us about the range of projects that you've done outside, in addition to the concept car work. I think you've told me that you've also done other work on kind of cutting edge auto topics.
Well, I'd say another important topic right now is to basically understand where the automotive industry is heading. And if you just imagine yourself, I would assume you have a car. And let's say it costs you, just to make it easy, it costs you 50 cents per kilometer to, I know you don't have the metric system. It costs you 50 cents per kilometer to take your car and to go somewhere. And all of a sudden there's robo cars and there's autonomous cars, and they have such a good utilization and they are produced in a very lean way. And then I'm telling you, it costs you 30 cents to be driven. So that means you have individual mobility available whenever you need it, and that robo-taxi would take you wherever you wanted to go, or they would even take your kids to school or to their piano lessons for 30 cents a minute. And then I think chances are very high that you decide, I don't need an own car anymore. What I need is a kind of membership in that robo-taxi company. So that I'd say that sounds still like very, very future thinking. But if you just look in the Chinese automotive market, the question whether you use a robo-taxi or a regular taxi isn't that important, because the employment costs are so much lower. So in China by now we already have 30 million rides a day with a company called Didi, which is, you could say, maybe the beginning of those robo-taxi companies. They still use human drivers, but in the future you have a lot of cars running around in the US, in Europe, without a driver, and the cost per kilometer are lower as if you would drive yourself. So as I said, chances are high that you would just sell your car and get a membership in that robo-taxi company. So, and we are helping clients to understand the consequences of that development, and we help them to understand what niche they could focus on when they want to build that ride-hailing or robo-taxi companies. That is another aspect that's becoming more and more important.
How are the auto companies worried about that world? Because I could imagine that we'll just collectively need fewer cars. So what is what's kind of the thinking in the industry?
Well, what we see is right now that many of the companies they have absolutely understood what is going on, and well, many of them are, how you say that, preparing their forces, trying to get ready in that market. So it's definitely not the case that this comes unexpected to the automotive industry. We are, I say we are proud to say that maybe we have been a bit earlier than others to understand that, but I would say by now, most of the automotive companies, they are absolutely aware of exactly that development. And the funny thing is that there's so the automotive companies, they either start building their own mobility providers. For example, in the German market, Daimler has an own mobility provider. They recently joined forces with BMW. And many of the OEMs, they start partnering with mobility providers. So, for example, Fiat Chrysler has recently started working together with Waymo. I think you're familiar to the mobility provider Waymo, and they want to integrate their full self-driving system into the Chrysler into a Chrysler hybrid minivan. Land Rover Jaguar is partnering with Waymo. Volvo is partnering with Uber. Volkswagen is partnering with Didi. So automotive companies are pretty active.
What are some of the other kind of emerging trends that you've been spending time working on?
Well, I think what I've just described, this is already such a big disruption that will really change the automotive industry completely. That is really my strong belief. Another aspect that we haven't worked on with our clients, but that is just, I don't know, maybe a side aspect that I've started working on, is the question on who is owning that ecosystem. So you don't want to have a car anymore. What you want is mobility, cheap, seamless, eco-friendly, safe mobility. And my hypothesis is that in the end, there will be maybe one app on your smartphone. And who is owning that app? An app that in the end integrates, as I said, seamlessly your short distance, maybe that connects you with a robot taxi, with a train, with a plane, maybe with a bike. And that is really something that I find extremely, extremely interesting. Who is in the end the leader in the new mobility ecosystem? And my perspective is that also the local governments, city governments, could play a very, very important role in that battlefield if they want to.
You know, one thing that I noticed just traveling around Europe recently was in a slightly different area. It was interesting in terms of bicycles, how city by city, kind of different solutions had emerged. So in Zurich, Lime was really big, and you could find a Lime bicycle all over the place, which was like awesome. You unlock it with an app and ride around. And then in Munich, there was like, I guess donkey bikes could be found, but those would be at like specific locations. You're supposed to leave them, I think. And then other cities, you could like rent bicycles by the day, and it was a little bit less easy to find. So, as using that as an analogy, I wonder if we'll end up where there'll be sort of just different solutions locally, city by city, where in some cities you can just, walk up to a parked car and, open that one up. In other cities, it'll be like robo-taxis driving around. How do you think there'll be kind of one winner across the board, or might it be very sort of just contingent on local circumstances and, in individual local markets, there's different landscapes emerge?
Well, I would say there's two important aspects. First of all, once the car is nothing you need for your personal ego anymore. And I think this is the case. These days are over where you need to have a big Mercedes standing in front of your house to show that you are someone, right? Once this is over, mobility is driven by costs per kilometer, and most people that act reasonable will simply look at the lowest costs per kilometer. And if the robo-taxi is the cheapest vehicle to get on, then a lot of people will go buy that robo-taxi. First thing. So what is the cheapest what is the cheapest transportation mode? And then the second question, and here or the second factor, and here's where I think the cities play an important role, is then local regulations. I'm not sure if you've been following the discussions in Germany that diesel was a very, very strong German technology, and now city by city diesel cars are being banned from the city centers. So when we have a situation where robo-taxis are even cheaper than individual transportation, that in the first place would not solve the problem of traffic jam. So I could imagine cities saying, I don't know, not sure if you've been to Paris lately, but I found there was very little cars in the city center, and the parking is so ridiculously expensive. So I consider Paris as a rather car unfriendly city. So as you rightly said, these are decisions taken by the cities, and the city governments can definitely shape how the ecosystem will look like. If they say, yes, you can go with a robo-taxi, but not in that 3 or 4 kilometer range in the very city center, or you can only go on this and that roads, and you cannot park here and there. So yeah, I do agree with you. I could imagine that the mobility ecosystems look different from city to city.
One thing that I kind of worried about, I guess, a little bit is, as we think about this transition to self-driving cars, it occurs to me that, when I started to drive, I was, pretty cautious, like not very good driver, right? And then after a while, it becomes so second nature, just like everyone. So that, 98% of the people driving around now on the roads are people that have been driving for a while. So they're pretty capable. So most people are pretty capable. And then you have a few cautious, like new drivers. So what's going to, what is the industry word, or what do you see happening as, as more and more people maybe end up, not driving very much at all, or maybe even never. And then in the case where sometimes if the car, some of these cars, like, they revert to driver control, in an emergency or something. But if they revert to driver control and that person is like basically a 16-year-old driver and is like barely ever driven, then it'll be reverting to someone who's a total novice, and you get this whole population of being really kind of novice drivers. So in the real end game, when the self-driving cars are awesome, and can totally drive themselves, then we're fine. But what happens during, that transition? And I wonder, like, are my kids ever going to really learn to drive? How is the industry thinking about that? How that whole transition will happen when there's like a lot of people who are kind of novice drivers?
Actually, I haven't thought about that aspect, that people, I don't know, kind of lose the skills in driving. Frankly speaking, I haven't thought about that. What we discuss is, but maybe this is a slightly different aspect. What we discuss is what happens when we have perfectly rational or simply perfect robo-taxis, and they start driving in pretty chaotic systems. For example, I don't know if you've been driven in China lately, but I think it's hard to imagine that you follow every single rule and you still get along in Chinese traffic. So when we talk about transition, it might be interesting to see how the perfect robotaxi is blending in a rather chaotic driving system. But maybe coming to the core of your question. I think that a lot of people, they won't have driver's licenses anymore. If I think about my kids, I don't expect them to have a driver's license at all.
It's amazing. A little bit sad in some way that, the driver's license was the kind of ticket to freedom for teenagers and the ability to get away from parental control and off on your own. And it's a little bit of a sad thing for the culture when that goes away.
Well, yeah, but then there's something new. I mean, now they have their cell phones and likes on Facebook. They have different things to define themselves with.
I wanted to turn to another industry where I know you've done some work, and that fascinates me and I think that maybe you're not working on this now so much, but you've done a fair bit of work around ports.
Mm-hmm.
Tell me, I mean, that's an area where I almost hadn't even really thought about ports until I recently read the book Boxed that came out several years ago about the container and how that revolutionized shipping. But tell me a little bit about the business of ports and the kind of questions that you worked on.
Well, first of all, I think it's important to understand the different roles in the ports industry. So first of all, there's, as you said, the container shipping. I think it was introduced, I don't know, in the 50s or 60s. And this is the basic method, the most common method for transporting products by sea. And as you said, it totally revolutionized global trade. So first of all, there's the container shipping company, and then there's the terminal operations. And when we think about the terminal operations, then there's the company that actually owns the physical port. You could say pure play infrastructure. And then there's the handlers, right, that own the big cranes that move the containers from the ships and navigate the containers in the ports. So it's basically these three different roles: the container shipment, the terminal operator, and you could say the infrastructure business. And obviously, to build a container terminal is extremely expensive. So this business is to a large extent subsidized. The container terminal hardly makes any money. It just costs you billions to build the terminals. So yes, this is the three different roles. And the project that I have been involved with was to think about where should ports be, just in a very simple physical sense. Where should they be? How many berths are necessary? So you would need to forecast the container streams going into a country, and then also think about transshipment routes. So if a container comes to Hamburg, chances are high that from there it's been transshipped. So there's basically two categories of container throughput. These are the so-called O&D, origin destination containers, and the transshipment containers. So the O&D traffic, this is simply containers that is moving to and from the hinterland, and the transshipment containers are sent, obviously. This is obviously throughput to other ports in the same region. So first of all, it's important to understand what kind of traffic and what demands do I have? What are the perfect locations for the berths? Where are they needed within a country? That is one aspect. The other aspect that I've been working on is if you think about the ports you are familiar with, many of those ports are in simply fantastic locations. Think about the port of Hamburg. It's just in the middle of the city, right? So the port authorities, they start to think about what is the best possible use of that precious piece of land in the middle of a city.
And in some cases, they might say, well, rather than having one extra berth, we will turn that into some beautiful condos.
Yes,
right?
Absolutely. Yeah. I've had exactly those. Discussions. Definitely, yes. And interestingly, maybe a berth is, you could say, the make or break of a port. So you simply have to have a berth and the relevant number. You have to have the right capacity to keep the port alive. But there are certainly logistic areas within a port that could as well be somewhere else, right? So if you think about, I don't know, let's say textile companies that bring their short shirts to the Hamburg port, do I really need that very, very expensive area right in the middle of the port to have my logistics centers to, I don't know, put the labels on the shirts and ship them to their end destinations? Or could I do that somewhere else and build another fancy apartment on that piece of land where the logistics area was before? And what you do here to answer this kind of questions is, well, you look at the GDP per square meter that can be, or the income per square meter that can be generated with different uses.
That sounds like amazing work with those ports. Back to the auto industry, how do you and your partner continue to stay up to date on the industry and also raise your visibility? So are you going to industry conferences or publishing or creating content? Or tell us a little bit about how you kind of stay engaged and up to date.
Well, luckily, in that very niche where we are operating, we were able to build a bit of a reputation. So it's a rather specialized thing, and if someone needs help in that area, they come to us. Of course, not everyone, right? So that's the one thing. And then, of course, we try to be active in all kinds of industry events. From time to time, we try to publish little articles in in business magazines. So, for example, I had recently a short interview on the blockchain or the relevance of the blockchain in the automotive industry. So we try to do, you'd probably call that public relations, right? So we try to be seen more and more in the industry.
Fantastic. Nina, what is the best way for listeners to find out more about your firm? Do you want to give a website or any other links?
Sure. Yeah, it's sic-group.eu. It stands for Stahl Automotive Consulting. And if what I said was of relevance, if you're interested in getting in touch with me, just drop me an email. Very, very happy to have a conversation.
Fantastic. And we'll include that contact info in the show notes. Nina, thank you so much for being on the show. This was a fascinating discussion.
It was my pleasure.
Thanks for listening to this episode of Unleashed, the show that explores how to thrive as an independent professional. Unleashed is sponsored by Umbrex, the world's first global community of top-tier independent management consultants. The mission of Umbrex is to create opportunities for independent management consultants to meet, share lessons learned, and collaborate. I'd love to get your feedback and hear any questions that you'd like to see us answer on this show. You can email me at unleashed@umbrex.com. That's UMBREX.com. If you found anything on the show helpful, it would be a real gift if you would let a friend know about the show and take a minute to leave a review on iTunes, Google Play, or Stitcher. And if you subscribe, our show will get delivered to your device every Monday. Our audio engineer is Dave Nelson. Our theme song was composed by Gary Negbauer, and I'm your host, Will Bachman. Thanks for listening.